The boy stood before the marble counter as if the whole world were holding its breath along with him. The manager was still smiling, convinced that it was just another funny scene of a poor boy trying to seem important. The attendants exchanged mocking glances, some taking steps back so as not to be seen laughing, as if they were in a hidden audience. But the boy, with his worn backpack slung over one shoulder and the crumpled paper in his hand, didn't seem to hear anything. His gaze was fixed on the screen, which began to flicker, as if something inside was awakening. First an alert, then another. Beeps that no employee recognized. The attendant pressed the enter key, and suddenly all the screens in the branch froze at the same time, displaying the same message in bright red: executive access, owner located. The silence that fell was so dense it felt like it weighed on someone's head. The manager turned slowly to the boy, now without a hint of a smile, his eyes wide as if he had just seen a ghost. And before anyone could react, the glass door of the branch slammed open, and the bank president, in his impeccable suit and with a completely pale face, walked straight to the boy, stopping a few steps away. For a moment that seemed endless, he simply stared at him, until his lips trembled and his voice came out as low as a desperate whisper. "Oh my God, it's you." Before we delve into this amazing story, tell me which city and state you're watching from. Leave a comment and I'll reply with gratitude. And while you're at it, subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, and like this video. We want to share more stories like this. The boy was still holding the crumpled paper in his hand when everything began to change, though he had no idea of the magnitude of the storm he was about to unleash. The agency was crowded that early afternoon. People talking loudly, employees typing hurriedly, customers complaining about queues, the chaotic noise of a typical bank. For him, however, that environment always had a different weight. It was the place where his mother came every month to deposit the few coins she painstakingly saved, as if she were building an invisible castle for her son's future. Now, with her no longer there to hold his hand, he had to come alone, and nothing seemed more difficult than going through that revolving door with his old backpack swinging on his back and everyone's eyes seemingly following him. At the counter, the cashier looked up and took a few seconds to hide her surprise. Maybe it was his simple t-shirt, maybe his worn sneakers, maybe the fact that he was just a child alone. But her professional smile immediately turned into an expression of restrained amusement, as if she were about to hear a funny story she could share with her colleagues during break. He approached slowly, placed the paper on the counter, and took a deep breath before speaking, his voice almost too low for the noisy environment. "Miss, I just wanted to check my balance." The sentence seemed to drift through the air like a fragile bubble, and for a second she just blinked. Then she leaned towards her colleague and whispered something that made them both laugh discreetly. It wasn't a malicious laugh, but it was enough to make the boy lower his eyes and hold his breath as if trying to protect himself from an imminent impact. The manager, a tall man in a navy blue suit with a smile always ready to appear when he thought he could impress someone, approached when he saw the employees' expressions. He looked at the boy with that mixture of impatience and superiority, reserved for those who believe that certain types of people shouldn't occupy certain spaces. "What's the joke, kid?" he asked in an almost paternalistic tone, but laden with irony. The boy raised his head and, with a slightly trembling voice, repeated his request. There was no joke, no provocation, no challenge. It was just a sincere, simple, almost fragile request. "I just want to see my balance." But, as if that were reason enough to turn it into a spectacle, the manager let out a nasal laugh and shook his head, turning to one of the attendants. "Okay, let's see what the millionaire's account is here." It was easy to see that he used that term only to reinforce the idea of absurdity, as if he were performing for an audience. The attendant typed the numbers from the paper slowly, almost begging for it to go wrong so she could laugh about it later. The boy watched everything in silence, trying not to show the anxiety that gripped his chest. It was the first time he had done this alone. It was the first time he had to face the world without his mother, and right there, where she always reassured him with a light touch on the shoulder and a hopeful smile. As she typed, the screen seemed slower than usual, as if it were processing something too big. First came a short beep, then another. The employee frowned, now without a hint of laughter. This isn't normal," she murmured, calling the other with a furrowed brow. Both analyzed the screen, their keys intertwined as if trying to solve a puzzle. The manager turned to them impatiently, ready to order them to resolve the matter quickly, until the screen flickered, first once, then twice. And suddenly, as if possessed by an external force, all the screens in the branch began to turn off and on simultaneously, generating a murmur of confusion among the tellers and attendants nearby. In less than 3 seconds, each monitor displayed the same message in large, red letters. Executive access. Owner located. The sentence seemed to grow louder over the silence that immediately fell, consuming all the air in the room. People around stopped talking. Some customers in the middle of the line exchanged glances, not understanding what was happening. The attendants rose from their chairs as if they had seen something forbidden, something they shouldn't have access to. The manager stood motionless, his lips slightly parted, glancing alternately between the boy and the screen as if something were disconnected in his own head. Suddenly, the humble boy he had ridiculed was no longer the butt of jokes. There was something there he couldn't process, something that defied any logical explanation. He knelt slightly to be at the boy's level, but his expression was no longer one of arrogance. It was one of fear. "Boy, where did you get this bill?" he asked in a hoarse voice. The boy, confused and frightened by the reaction, simply replied, "My mother opened it for me when I was little." The manager tried to hide the tremor in his hand as he touched the keyboard again. He typed quick commands, trying to access internal information that wasn't normally available to the basic staff. But nothing progressed. The system crashed every time he tried to go deeper, until a new alert appeared. More serious, more restrictive, funds blocked, bank president notified. The message flashed on the screen for a few seconds, but it was enough to make the manager collapse in his chair, pale. The boy didn't understand, and that only increased the feeling of unease throughout the entire agency. Then the glass door burst open, and a man in a grey suit with an imposing posture crossed the space like a silent storm. He greeted no one, didn't look at the attendants, didn't ask any questions. He seemed to have been pulled by an invisible magnet toward the boy. His steps were hurried, but there was something fragile in his gaze, as if he were afraid to see what he had always tried to avoid. With each step, the silence deepened. The manager tried to say something, but his voice barely came out. The man stopped before the boy and stared at him as one sees a ghost, or as one finally finds something he has spent his whole life fearing and desiring at the same time. His eyes welled up, his chin trembled. The boy took a step back, not understanding the approach, but the man raised a hand, not to touch him, but as if asking for a second to breathe. "What is your name?" he asked, in a voice that seemed about to shatter. The boy answered, and at that exact moment, the man closed his eyes tightly, as if an old memory had pierced his heart. He opened his eyes again, stared at the boy with an intensity that made everyone around hold their breath, and then, in an almost inaudible whisper but laden with truth, he let slip, "Oh my God, it's you." The silence that filled the agency after that sentence seemed almost solid, as if each person inside was trapped in an inexplicable moment. The boy stared at the man in the grey suit, unsure how to react, not understanding why this stranger was looking at him as if he were facing something precious he had lost long ago. Around them, employees tried to disguise their panic, some retreating, others pressing buttons behind the counter as if that could undo what was happening. But nothing lessened the weight of the scene. The bank president, one of the most important men in the city, his eyes brimming with tears as he looked at a thin boy in a simple t-shirt and worn backpack. He tried to speak again, but his voice faltered, and for a moment he just took a deep breath, as if fighting a knot rising in his throat. The boy took a half step back, confused, but the man immediately extended his hand, not to hold him, but as someone asking for calm, a gesture almost begging for a moment of understanding. I need to confirm something, he said, his voice trembling as he looked at the manager. Bring everything, now. The manager rushed as if his life depended on it, and the entire agency watched the door to the inner room open and close rapidly as he disappeared inside. The president didn't take his eyes off the boy, as if he feared that if he blinked, he would vanish, and then, carefully, he bent down to his level, his voice a whisper laden with contained emotion. How long ago did your mother pass away? The question hit the boy like a cold wave. He lowered his gaze and clutched the paper in his hand. 3 months. The man closed his eyes for a moment, took a deep breath as if trying to contain an inner collapse, and when he opened them again, there was a gleam that mixed pain, regret, and a hope so fragile it seemed about to shatter at the slightest touch. Meanwhile, the manager rushed back with a black leather briefcase in his hands, breathing heavily as if he had run a kilometer. He didn't dare look at the boy, simply placing the briefcase on the nearest table and opening it, revealing a stack of old documents, some yellowed with age, others sealed with stamps that only very high-ranking officials were allowed to access. The president pulled out a specific paper, as if he already knew exactly what he was looking for, and his hands trembled as he unfolded it. It was an old birth certificate, with names the boy didn't recognize, but which made the man take a deep breath in a way that seemed to tear him apart inside. He turned the paper aside, looked for another document, read a date, checked a name, closed his eyes. When he looked at the boy again, there was a truth there that no one could deny anymore. He knew who that boy was. "I've been looking for you for years," he murmured, his voice hoarse, and the phrase hung in the air like a secret ripped from the depths of a wound. The boy frowned, confused. Looking for whom? The president took another deep breath, as if gathering every shred of courage to reveal what he was about to say. "Your mother. And you." He brought his hand to his face for a moment, discreetly wiping away a tear that threatened to fall, and then added, his voice choked with emotion, "I am your father." The entire agency seemed to dissolve in shock. A customer dropped her purse. A clerk put her hand to her mouth. The manager almost lost his balance. The boy, however, froze completely. His expression wasn't one of immediate surprise, but of someone trying to piece together a puzzle he never imagined existed. He took a step back, then another, as if trying to escape something that didn't make sense. The president slowly raised his hands, carefully, as if trying to calm a wounded animal. "I know this is a lot. I know it's too late to ask for forgiveness, but I need you to listen. I didn't abandon you. I didn't know where you were. His voice faltered again, and he needed to take a deep breath before continuing. "I was wrong, and I lost more than you can imagine." The boy gripped the strap of his backpack tightly. "My mother never spoke of you." The man nodded slowly, his gaze lost for a moment. "I know, and she had her reasons, but that doesn't change who you are, or what you're entitled to." The manager then nervously cleared his throat, and the president picked up another document, thicker, heavier, with security seals that gleamed under the agency's light. He opened it, turned it sideways, and placed it before the boy as if revealing a treasure hidden for years. It was the document for the investment fund created by his grandfather, a gigantic fortune accumulated over decades. "All of this," said the president, carefully placing his hand on the paper, "is in your name." Employees exchanged glances, trying to understand if this was real or some kind of impossible dream. The clerk who had laughed earlier seemed about to faint. The manager repeatedly ran his hand across his forehead, sweating profusely. The boy looked at the enormous numbers in the report, but everything seemed distant, confusing, impossible to comprehend at that moment. This is mine?" he asked, his voice almost inaudible. The president smiled for the first time, but it was a smile filled with sadness, regret, and pride all at once. "It is, and it always has been." He then slowly stood up, turned to all the employees, and spoke in a firm tone that echoed off the walls. "From today onward, this boy is not just a preferred customer. He is the rightful heir to the institution, and he will be treated with the respect he has always deserved." The manager, trembling, tried to respond, but his own voice betrayed him. The attendant stepped forward, choking back an apology. Other employees lowered their heads, ashamed. But the boy simply watched everything in silence, his heart racing, his mind spinning. He never wanted to humiliate anyone. He never wanted anything more than to know how much was left in the account his mother had left him. And even in the face of that frightening revelation, he raised his head, took a deep breath and said, with a maturity no one expected, "I just came to check my balance. I don't want to hurt anyone." The sentence fell like a gentle but devastating blow. The president closed his eyes, moved, and carefully placed his hand on the boy's shoulder. The care of someone who has finally found what he has been searching for his whole life. Thus, faced with an entire agency paralyzed, a father and son began to reconstruct a lost history. And everyone around them witnessed, still stunned, the most unexpected turn of events they had ever seen. The president still had his hand on the boy's shoulder as the branch slowly began to move again. Not naturally, quite the opposite. It was as if everyone were moving within a deep lake, each step hesitant, each breath heavy, each look laden with consequences. The manager tried to organize papers, trembling, unsure whether to apologize, kneel, or disappear. The tellers exchanged desperate glances, remembering each laugh, each look of disdain they had given seconds before. But the boy remained still, as if still trying to understand if this was real or if the entire bank had transformed into some kind of strange dream that only his mother could explain. The president, noticing the confusion in his son's eyes, took a deep breath and knelt slightly to ensure he looked him in the eyes without any sense of superiority. "I know this is frightening," he began, his voice low and intense. "But I want you to know that none of this needs to be decided today. Nothing will be imposed on you. I won't push you into a world you don't know." He then paused, as if choosing each word with the utmost care, before adding, "I just want the chance to be your father." The boy blinked a few times, feeling a strange pressure in his chest. It wasn't sadness, nor anger. It was something else. A kind of emptiness being slowly filled, as if a door he thought was locked was opening for the first time. But before he could answer, the manager stepped forward, stretching his body as if his spine were about to give way under the weight of fear. "Sir, President," he began, his voice seeming about to break, I apologize profusely for what happened here. We didn't know who he was. We would never..." The president raised his hand and interrupted him with a gentle but firm gesture. "The mistake wasn't not knowing who he was," he replied. "The mistake was thinking you knew. Dley." The sentence returned silence to the agency, as if it had been thrown there to cut off all available air. The manager's face shrank, and his eyes immediately welled up with tears, shame overflowing defenselessly. It was then that a clerk, the same one who had laughed first, stepped forward, She seemed smaller, almost fragile, and her hands trembled as she clutched her name tag. I just wanted to joke, she said, but her voice faltered so much that the sentence barely seemed to form. I didn't realize that. She swallowed hard, lost. We shouldn't have treated you like that, she said, looking directly at the boy, her eyes shining with regret. The boy watched the woman, and for a moment, the tension in his face softened. He held no grudge. He never had. He just didn't understand why people needed to laugh at him to feel better. It's okay, he said softly but sincerely. I don't like it when people laugh at me. The woman began to cry, as if that simple sentence was stronger than any punishment she could receive. The president turned to his son, touching his shoulder more firmly now. Come, he said with a gentleness that only someone holding back old emotion can convey. Let's go to my office. You don't need to stay here exposed. But the boy shook his head slowly, refusing. I want to see my balance, he repeated with disarming calm. The president took a deep breath, smiling fully for the first time, an almost proud smile. Of course, he replied. Then let's see. The manager rushed to the nearest computer, wiping his hands on his trousers as if trying to rid them of the panic he felt. The system, previously frozen, automatically recognized the priority access as soon as the boy approached. Lines of text, numbers, internal codes appeared in seconds, until finally the central screen displayed the total amount. The number was so large that even the most experienced employees didn't know how to react. One customer placed her hand on her chest, another let out a loud sigh. The manager stumbled backward. The president simply looked at the boy, waiting for his reaction. The boy tilted his head slightly, trying to comprehend how many zeros it had. He didn't understand the exact dimension, but he understood that it had been built with love, not ambition. Did my grandfather leave this to me? He asked, still looking at the screen. The president nodded, his eyes welling up with tears. Yes, he would love you very much. The boy bit his lower lip, and then something unexpected happened. He smiled. Not a smile of victory, arrogance, or power, but a small, shy, emotional smile. A smile that seemed to say that, for the first time, he felt important. Not because of the money, but because someone, at some point in history, cared so much about him that they thought about the future, even without knowing what was to come. The president took another deep breath and approached. I know it's a lot, he said, but I don't want you to carry this alone. I want to help if you'll let me. The boy looked at him, his eyes filled with a simple yet profound doubt. Will you stay? The question made the president close his eyes for a moment, swallowing a lump that seemed to pierce his voice. If you let me, I'll never leave again. The boy took a step forward and, for the first time since entering the bank, hugged someone. Not a timid hug, not a wary hug, but a firm, tight hug, as if filling years of absence in a single gesture. The president embraced his son carefully, but with all the strength of someone who finds what he thought he had lost forever. Around them, no one moved. There was no laughter, no whispering, no footsteps, only a respectful silence, heavy with reverence for the scene. The manager wiped his eyes. The clerk wept openly. The entire agency seemed to have been transformed by that moment, as if everyone had been reminded of something that is often forgotten in our hurried world. The value of seeing someone before judging them. When the hug finally ended, the boy took a deep breath, adjusted his backpack on his shoulder, and looked around. There was no arrogance, no provocation, no desire for revenge. There was only the maturity of someone who had to grow up too soon. He walked to the counter, observed the still shivering employees, and said with all the sincerity in the world, I'm not going to ask for anyone to be fired. I just want no one to laugh at other people like they laughed at me. The president touched his shoulder again, proudly. "He has more wisdom than all of us put together," he said, and the phrase echoed like absolute truth. So, with the entire agency in reverent silence, the boy turned to his father and spoke softly, but with a force that would change everything from then on. "Shall we go home?" And for the first time in his life, the president, the most powerful man in the bank, answered with a peaceful smile, as if he had just found exactly what he had always lacked. "Let's go, son." They left side by side, leaving behind not only an entire agency bewildered, but a lesson forever etched in the memory of everyone who witnessed that turnaround. A lesson that began with a simple, almost naive, but profoundly true request. "I just want to see my balance." And if this story touched your heart, don't keep it to yourself. Share this video with someone you love. Click now to share it. Like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you don't miss any of the upcoming stories we're preparing with great care for you.